Welcome to the QFF Business Hour, where we discuss farm business issues. Join us on the last Wednesday of each month at 4 p.m. to engage with industry and professional business advisors to assist you in building your strategic management capacity to prepare for and manage business and climate risks, as well as improve economic, environmental and social resilience. And I wish to begin today's episode by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land, seas and waters throughout Australia, and pay respects to elders past, present and future. This session is made possible through the Future Drought Fund Farm Business Resilience Program, a jointly funded program by the Australian Government and the Queensland Drought and Climate Adaptation Program. And in this episode of the QFF Farm Business Hour, we will discuss family business governance and key issues faced by the Australian farming families today. Now, it's time to introduce our wonderful panellists. We have Marina Skinner, business consultant, Generational Harmony. We have Kylie Wilson, partner holding Redlick. Susan Bryant, financial advisor, Seeds of Advice, and Lloyd Russell, director, TCB Solutions. A wonderful and warm welcome to you all.
Thank you, Sally. Lovely to be here.
It's great to have you on board. I'll get back to you all shortly, but I'm just going to move forward now into our introduction before we get going. Australian agriculture has long been based on a foundation of family farming units, with farms owned and operated by farm families whose members supply most of the labour involved in operating the farm. According to the Australian Bureau of Agricultural and Resource Economics and Sciences, there are over 85,000 businesses, farm businesses in Australia. 99% of them are family owned and operated. That is a huge percentage. Farmers who own and run a family farm business tend to be mostly self-employed, tend to work considerably longer hours than most other occupations, and also retire at a later age. Today's panellists are experts in understanding the machinations of family farming units and the various issues faced by them. They are all highly skilled professionals with a deep knowledge and experience of governance, legal and succession matters found at the core of many family-operated farms. No one goes through the hard work, the risks and the sacrifices required to run a family business without hoping that it will have longevity. Building value that is sustainable for many farm businesses is as much about continuing the family tradition as it is about heritage. Yet, when the time comes to pass on the family farming business, there can be conflict, confusion, and uncertainty. Many reports suggest that the proportion of farms being transferred to a successor is declining. Understanding the factors underpinning this trend is critical to designing strategies to act as incentives for individuals to remain on or return to the farm to ensure the continuation of family farming. So important. And to help kick off today's session, I would now like to welcome our first panellist, Marina Skinner, business consultant, Generational Harmony. Marina is a family business consultant with more than 20 years' experience. She provides a strategic perspective with a whole of business approach for clients, having worked across multiple industry sectors with family business clients within Australia and also internationally. Marina's area of specialty is formulating comprehensive family charters, family strategy and communication to guide families in business. She's a very, very busy lady and we're very, very happy to have her with us today. Hi, Marina.
Oh, hi, Sally. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's great to have you on board. Now, let's start with the first question that I want to ask, and I know everybody wants to know about what is succession planning and the purpose of succession. And how do I know if I was a farmer, if it's the right choice for me?
Great question, a great way to start. Look, technically speaking, it's actually the process of identifying the key and critical positions within the business, developing an action plan for those individuals to assume those positions. In the long term, it actually strengthens the capability of the business. But quite simply, it's really about the people and business continuity. But in family business, and most particularly in farming family businesses, it's a little bit more complicated because the people aren't just employees, they're family.
Yes.
And it just adds an added level of complexity, but at the same time, opportunity too. So it's really looking at what succession planning, or transition planning, as I like to call it, can be considered a journey. And what that journey looks like, how do we actually travel it so that we're set up for success? Now, the purpose really is to mitigate risk and to give you peace of mind for you and your family's future. And I think sometimes people get caught up and forget that that's what it's all about. And you also asked me, is it the right choice for our farmers? Well, if you're lying in bed awake at night and you can't sleep properly because you're worried about if everyone's going to be able to get along, who's the best person to be taking over the different key roles within the business, and even if they're capable of stepping up, well, then starting that succession planning process now is a really good idea.
Okay. But when? When do you start?
When?
When is early enough?
Oh, look, there's this beautiful old Chinese proverb that I absolutely love. It says, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The next best time is now.
Oh, that's a great one to remember. Love that. I'll remember that myself.
It fits in nicely with the theme too with the farmers.
So yesterday's your answer?
Definitely.
Okay. And percentage-wise, how many of your clients understand the importance of that? Do they get that it's got to be now?
It's hard. It really is hard actually figuring out when the right time to start is, and and whether they even want to go there. They hear all the horror stories. They know how badly things can play out. And so it's frightening to take that step forward and think about what do we need to put in place. It's sometimes easier not to make a choice and to actually hope that we'll all get sorted out when they're gone and let the kids deal with it then. And that's really not a good idea. I think the whole family needs succession planning. You're in it together. They need to be involved with it and work through it together. And I think that's really, really important. I know from the research that I've been involved with in the past and that I've read globally, there's a 70% failure rate when you see the transition from one generation to the next. I mean, that's huge. So
70%.
70% each time there's a transfer. So 70% for the first to the second, and then so you've only got 30%, it's another 70% fail to transition adequately in the next generation, and so on. And it's not just here in Australia, it's a global trend, and it's been that for many, many years. But I will say that in my experience and with the research backing it, the families that actually spend time on planning and planning for the transition of the family, not just the business and the assets, are the succession success stories. And I think that's a really key thing to know, that it is possible to be successful. We don't have to leave it to chance. You can actually begin now.
I wanted to talk to you about inheritance. Do parents feel like they owe their children, or they owe them an opportunity through inheritance?
Look, it's an interesting question, Sally, and it often comes back to there's a sense of obligation and then there's the sense of entitlement as well. However, if you can develop a framework and start having meaningful conversations, you can actually shift that dynamic. Communication is actually the key here. And just imagine everyone sitting around the table having conversations where you're all aligned towards the same vision and goals for the success of the business, and actually engaging both family and business in that. I think I can't stress enough just how important it is to establish kind of forums that you can have in place to have these kind of meetings for your success. So that might be just the family meeting, it might start around the kitchen table, but as the business evolves and develops, then get a little bit more sophisticated, look at setting up a family council. And then for the broader family, those children that maybe aren't actively involved in the business, having those family gatherings are just a critical part of engaging and being inclusive when you look at what that inheritance might look like and in the future.
Because that could be quite a barrier, couldn't it? When there's the children that are involved and the children that aren't. So, that could be one of the major barriers, I'd imagine, to succession negotiations around that table.
It can be. Quite often it's not even asking, does someone want to be involved? Where do they feel about it? Or even identifying who are the right people to be engaged in different areas. And it doesn't have to be working on the farm. There are so many other opportunities to be a part of the family and the family's wealth and the vehicle that creates it. So, you talked earlier about this decline that we're seeing in succession. And I think it's just because families think it's too hard and they're really concerned that they're not going to get it right. They've seen it fail. So is there any point? We'll just keep on keeping on and let the kids worry about it later. And look, I'm sure Kylie will have some comments to make on that shortly.
You're absolutely right.
Kylie's chomping at the bit to join in here.
And look, it's those layers that get added in around the family dynamics, the conflicting visions and values. What are the financial goals? And then looking at succession, things can get complicated really, really fast. And that's the concern, I think, when we see that happening, is how do we actually move forward? And that's one of the questions that I think is probably an even bigger one, not who should be doing succession, when we should be doing it, but how. How can we actually do succession so that we're improving our chances of success?
And what would you say to that, though? What are some of your suggestions?
Well, I found that it's actually starting with that family governance piece. So often in the past, I've been brought in to work with families where there's been a critical event of some kind. They've gone, but we've got the structures right. We've got the we've got the advice around what we're doing with the assets and who's going to take over, but they haven't actually looked at addressing the family and how they bring them together and be a part of that process. So actually developing some family governance, those forums in place, being clear and aligned as to what the vision is, building a strong foundation that's based on those family values, the traditions, the wonderful qualities that's made the business great and helped it continue.
Yeah.
Definitely. And writing it down. I know farmers don't like to write things down, but actually having something written that...
As opposed to up here.
Definitely. Yeah, you've got it, girl. Definitely. So, developing a family charter that's around the rules and guidelines that this family discuss and agree is the way in which they'd like to go forward, and that it can be a guiding light for future generations as well. Having those open discussions, being inclusive, and then developing that strategic action plan that you can actually put forward to the table, have the family involved and engaged, and implement. Please don't forget to implement. Don't throw it in the bottom drawer and forget about it. But they're the things that make it successful. And I've often come in at a point in time with families where they go, we've done our restructuring, we've got all the assets in place, we've done some planning, we know who's in and out. And then they go, we're now ready to do this family charter and set up a family council. And by the time we finish it and everyone's had their chance to have a say, be heard and listened to, they go, oh, that's actually not the direction we're taking now. We've got to go back and redo the structures. We've got to relook at our minimising tax. We've really got to, so I see it, and that's why I specialised in this area of family governance and charters and councils, was to help people figure out what they want first before they go.
Communicate, Marina. Communicate, it helps communicate. That's what promotes the communication. Yeah,
save yourself some money and then actually start heading in the right direction and have a success strategy in place, rather than a let's see where it goes and hope it all works out plan, which isn't a very good plan.
No. Well, thanks, Marina. We're just going to move on into legal issues now. And And I'll bring Kylie in a sec. Australian farms have traditionally been held within quite simple legal structures, such as sole proprietorships or family partnerships. A study by McAllister and Gino in 2004 found that increasingly changing agricultural requirements and expectations, new legal arrangements for landholding, retirement and succession planning are required, with many farmers lacking awareness of the legal implications of transferring rural assets. Effective succession planning will require a holistic delivery of financial, taxation and legal advice that considers the complex circumstances of individual families and their relationships to the business. Australian courts, for example, are increasingly recognising the law of estoppel and that it may have a big part to play in the way in which rural land is passed to the next generation. So we want to delve further into the topic of all things legal, and I'm going to bring Kylie in now. Kylie Wilson is the partner of Holding Redlich. She's an experienced solicitor in succession planning and an accredited self-managed super fund specialist advisor and a Family Business Australia accredited advisor. She's also worked with family businesses for over 20 years, so she's got a lot of experience ensuring their business can remain viable without the risk of litigation devolving business assets is one of her key areas of specialty, which is why we really want Kylie on board with this conversation. Now, Kylie, hello.
Hi. and thanks again. Thanks for having me again.
It's great to have you back here. And we want to start, if you could please explain to everybody the legal principle of the doctrine of promissory estoppel and what are its legal implications when transferring real assets.
And I think Marina's had a really good starting point in respect of leading into these type of things from the perspective of what she was talking about with the whole family holistically in communication, because where we see proprietary estoppel and constructive trust, they're normally pled together in legal cases. There is quite a bit of it in family farming specifically. And a lot of that revolves around a failure of communication at a particular point. So when you have specifically, which often happens in family farming, one or two children on farm and then other children off farm, and communication may not have occurred and the transition or succession hasn't been happening, and someone's invested their entire financial future in a farm and now have their own family, but no financial security, these sort of issues are going to start to arise. And often what I say to families in that communication piece is the problem in family farming is you'll have a very large asset, but people have got to think about themselves more as custodians. So that farm is intended to pass on to multiple generations. So children off farm aren't getting sometimes communicated with appropriately about the fact that this farm over here might be worth $20 million, but the child that's going to receive that isn't necessarily going to have $20 million. So they might only be receiving 1.5% return, for example, on the income off that farm, whereas the off-farm children might have a different inheritance and all they have to do is, instead of working 7 days a week, look at their dividend receipts in their bank account. I know which one I'd rather have. But that type of conversation leads to these proprietary estoppel issues, and we call it the kitchen table promise, but it is actually a lot more than that. So it's a difficult claim to establish, but we are seeing a rise in these claims actually being brought. So families need to think about them because it has a commercial consequence for the business, because obviously then you have legal fees and legal fees of more than one member of the family. So where we have aging parents no longer heavily involved in the business, and as I said, someone really has their entire financial future and communication hasn't happened about how they're going to get financial security, that's when we'll often see these claims come about. And it is effectively, you have to have representations that have been made usually by the first generation, but you have to actually be able to prove those representations. So just saying that you've met around a kitchen table is not necessarily going to be sufficient. You've got to actually have the evidence. And then that person has to show that that's led to an assumption that they will receive the asset that's been promised, and they have to have detrimentally relied on that promise. So a good example of one that we've seen in case law is a daughter who basically was working with her husband in a nursery. Mum and dad needed help on the farm. She sold up her business, so sacrificed her assets, came back onto the home farm, stayed there with the husband and managed it for another 20 years.
With an expectation, I would imagine.
With that and detrimental reliance. And it wasn't transitioned to her, and there were other children outside, and it became clear there was the potential for an estate challenge. Child in that circumstance really is back against the wall. This may be the only option I have. And then we also see constructive trust in that it's a slightly different legal argument, but it's often pled with proprietary estoppel, and that's in the context of something similar where, let's say, that daughter then put all the money she got from the nursery into the farm as well. And you had a case in Queensland called Nolan and Nolan, where basically the next generation was getting divorced, but their contributions to the family farm, because the son had been managing it and the daughter-in-law had been working in it as well, and they'd put contributions in the farm, had led to a decision by the court to say that at least part of the farm was held on constructive trust for those children. So that's where we see this actually failing to think about and plan this long-term communication and discussion about this business as a business, because, as I've said to many people as I've talked about these things, tell me a business in Australia other than a family business that thinks it's okay to plan for the transition of the business via a will. And you won't be able to name me one other than a family business, because it's bad business. So the need to think about these businesses as businesses and then deal with how the family involves itself in the business and communicate that openly is just so incredibly important to save people paying too much money to lawyers, basically.
Right. Well, is there a difference between management succession and estate planning, though?
Yes. And I think that this concept gets confused fairly frequently. So estate planning is something that, yes, should be part of the process, but it should never be the entire process when we're dealing with a farming business, and particularly where large value farming assets are held in personal names. And realistically, the reason for that is a massive rise in estate challenges, and where we have large value assets sitting in personal names, even if the applicant loses, it is likely that the estate will be paying everybody's costs. So you ultimately end up with a big impact on the business, because if we don't have a lot of liquidity there, but we've got large assets, what's going to happen to the assets? Yeah. They're likely going to, at least some of them are going to have to be sold to pay the legal fees. So if you're just thinking about doing it in a will and you've got assets in your personal name, you're not actually doing business succession. You actually need to think about the whole process. And as Marina's talked about, we talk about succession planning as something that has to evolve when we're talking about farm business transition. And because children are at different ages, the business is at different ages, it's not something you should sit there and say, this is what we're going to do. It may have to, which is why communication needs to keep occurring. And everyone needs a team of advisors involved at various points. So financial planners, facilitators, accountants, lawyers at different points, depending on what the issues are, what's being communicated and what needs to be dealt with. That's what's involved in that succession. And the risk of just management succession and not business succession comes up fairly regularly now, particularly from a tax and duty perspective. So if I see a lot of farms where mum and dad have said, no, I'm going to hang on to everything, but you can run the business, we'll transition the business over to you. And then suddenly they realise that they've got a very big risk sitting out here 10 years down the track of someone who is likely to challenge the estate, and now they want to transition it. The problem you have then is mum and dad, who are maybe the relevant small business entity, and I'll talk about that a little bit shortly in respect of tax, but it's no longer an active asset of theirs, that they may no longer be a small business entity because they're not conducting the business. And then from a duty perspective, they're also not conducting the business to get the exemption that's there. It was really a concession, but it's actually an exemption at the time it's transferred. So a lot of advisors talk about, well, let's just transition the management and see how they go. There are risks in that longer term. So you need to think about that fairly carefully. And that's why you need to look at the entire business succession in a very holistic approach with the group of advisors generally, so that everything is covered and dealt with, so we're not unwinding big problems down the track.
Well, this is certainly something that, you know, a normal family sitting around the table wouldn't be able to manage this on their own. You know, they need outsiders and independent people to come in, and experts like yourselves to come in and advise.
And often it's the communication piece, and as you were talking about before, how do they start? If communication is a problem, then plan to have someone who's good at communication, not involved with the family, come and help you communicate. Because you've got to get it going. Because just, you know, ignoring the problem. We see in mediations in particular that there's some little issue that occurred 20 years prior that was never actually dealt with and would have been a small issue at the time, has sort of fermented with someone and become a big resentment problem, and it's caused a massive issue at a later point in time. And that's just a failure to progress the communication because it's too hard. If it's too hard, get help.
Yeah. And you know, and it's just damaging to the family unit as well, and the relationships within the family. That's
right. Well, and you know, you want your family to be able to keep talking, and litigation generally means that that's unlikely. So the idea is to really try and make sure you can transition the thing without that happening, because at the end of the day, these sort of fights over family farms, the only people that win are the lawyers. So
yeah, okay.
Bad business for me, but it's important.
Yeah. And what are the impacts of consolidation in agriculture on the farming family, competition, and the agribusiness itself?
Well, this is becoming a bigger issue for family farms in particular, and has been for a while now. And realistically, what we're seeing is the way farming businesses have evolved and what's happening in this space and rising costs, etc., that farming business more and more need to be agile and efficient to continue to be viable. So there are advantages and disadvantages then for family farms in respect of this consolidation piece. And some reports estimate a decrease in the number of farms in Australia due to consolidation by 2050 to be 30%. So that's in the context of, and we see succession problems in that space as well. So if you're having a dispute and you end up with a very long-term dispute because there are entrenched issues and the costs become significant, what's likely to happen? And what's likely to happen is the farm's going to be sold. And ultimately, that may mean another farming family buys it, may mean a company buys it. And in some circumstances, that's voluntary, because we will often see some farming families are consolidating with other farming families to get economies of scale and that sort of thing. So it's not a simple issue. And you also see, on the one hand, there are benefits that have been increased innovation, increased farm productivity when we've had consolidation. But then on the other hand, you've had some negative impacts, which are reduction in the number of farms, reduced rural employment, and related population reductions in those areas because of this consolidation issue. So family farms do remain an essential part of rural economies and communities and need to be protected. And one of the biggest issues, which is why we're talking about it, that is facing family farms and this issue of protecting them, is the risk of dispute in this space, because we're not transitioning family farms from an intergenerational perspective the way they need to be transitioned as effectively as we should be. And it's becoming just a bigger risk in this space across a number of agricultural industries.
Okay, I just wanted to ask you one more question before I move on, Kylie. What impact do assets and income tests and business structures have on succession planning?
So I'll start with the business structures, because that's one that's come up quite a lot recently as a problem. I see a lot of clients who have had structures. Sometimes they grow like mushrooms because they're put in place on a lot of occasions to help maximise what advantages or concessions might be available from a tax perspective, minimise those issues, improve cash flow, etc., without a long-term thought around what's going to happen if this is a family farming business and we need to move it. And even if you're looking at the simple, so let's take what's really common in family farms, which is a partnership. And there might be a partnership between mum and dad, or mum, dad and son. And that's really common. And there's a reason for that, because there are some tax advantages to having a partnership when you're on farmland. However, if these things don't have partnership agreements, under the Partnership Act in Queensland and in New South Wales, if someone passes away in that partnership and there's no agreement saying to the contrary, that partnership has to be dissolved at the date of death. partnership doesn't continue. And that can have some unintended consequences. I had a dispute recently that got referred to me where it already been running for about 6 years because dad died, son, mum and dad were in partnership. 12 months later, mum died. There's a dispute about all the assets from the other siblings. Son's still trying to run the business, and he's trying to run the business in the partnership with mum and dad's estates, when in fact they should have dissolved back at the time of dad's death 5 years prior. And you then try unwinding that for the court from the perspective of what actually should have happened from a tax perspective when that thing dissolved 5 years ago. And that all could have been avoided. Yep, all could have been avoided with an appropriately drafted partnership agreement. And that's just the simple stuff. So discretionary trusts, we're seeing some issues at the moment. The law isn't actually changing. So there's a lot of people getting concerned about laws. The law hasn't changed really in this space. It's just that we are seeing beneficiaries start to realise that trustees have duties. So mum and dads who are trustees of trusts actually have trustee duties. And some children who might not have been receiving distributions from that trust over a period of time can then challenge whether resolutions that have been made about income distributions, etc., have actually been done appropriately according to law with what's called real and genuine consideration of all the beneficiaries. So there's a bit of movement in this area from the perspective of where we're seeing the disputes come from. And it's really important from a structuring perspective that clients understand what they've got and what they might need to do to just have a review, and should anything be tweaked and fixed up to lower the risk of problems down the track, because the short term's often dealt with well, but the long term's often not dealt with well. So those things are important. We're talking about the government taxes, obviously capital gains tax when we're trying to transition assets, if assets are post-85. There are a whole range of issues within the small business concessions that have to be looked at and dealt with and advised on. And the earlier that's done, the easier it is to plan for. If you're trying to do it in a hurry because someone's realised there's going to be a dispute, you might miss the boat and pay a lot more money in tax than you would have otherwise. So, understanding what sits in this space, what you have, what's going to impact the long term, not just the short term, is just so important.
Mm-hmm. It's awareness, isn't it? Just being aware of it all.
Yeah, and look, as I say, the issue of review, double check, know what you have, get a little bit of advice about whether there's anything to make it a bit easier. That stuff's not expensive. It's a really cheap insurance policy. Trying to fix it later when the disputes happened, that is a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
So getting in front of it early and just understanding whether you need to know more about what you have. And again, we come back to the long-term plan, knowing where you go. You can't get anything in life if you don't have a plan for it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the key message. Yeah. Thanks, Kylie. We'll move on. Well, this brings us, of course, to financial planning and its importance in mitigating risks associated with family farms. And modern farm management is technologically, it's intensive, requiring complex budgeting and financial planning. As we've heard, farmers today are required to think more as managers, embracing the same skills and responsibilities as other business managers embrace. In reality, the business environment in which Australian farmers and agribusinesses currently operate has undergone an enormous amount of change in the last couple of decades and would be almost unrecognisable to someone who operated a farm just, only a generation ago, which is not far, ago, not long ago. Breaking down outdated rural ideologies relating to inheritance, forward planning of asset management, and building sound financial and operational structures could be the difference between a good succession and the need to sell the farm upon retirement or death. So, a lot needs to happen because we want to try and avoid that, of course. And to discuss financial planning and its importance, I'd now like to welcome our next panellist who's been patiently waiting there, Susan Bryant, financial advisor, Seeds of Advice. Susan is an experienced financial planner, establishing her own firm, Seeds of Advice, in 2011. And she has over 30 years experience in the financial planning profession, working with hundreds of farming families, as well as working in private wealth management with industry-leading private wealth firms. It's great to have you with us as well, Susan. Thank you for being so patient, and welcome.
Thank you, Sally. It's great to be back.
Yes,
I could listen to those guys all day. So
absolutely, you know, and I forget I've got to keep moving things along, and I'm watching the time. So I'd like to start with the first question. What are the major issues associated with a lack of financial and family planning? What's the major issues?
Quite a few have been touched on by both Marina and Kylie. But from where I sit, one of the biggest things is this, what I see, this lack of risk assessment. As Kylie said, people are not forward thinking. So they're not thinking about, well, they are thinking about, we want to do this in the business, we want to acquire another block, or we want to, you know, diversify into something else, or we want to do this, or we want to do that, but they don't get any further than how to make that happen. And I think it really can be very powerful if people sit down and start with what their why is. Why are they actually doing this? What is the purpose of the action they're about to take? How are they going to do it? Who's going to do it? And what are they actually going to do? And project that forward to the next generation and the generation after that, so that if you're taking this risk assessment of every step that you take, all those issues that Kylie was talking about, they will pop their head up and you can deal with them now. You can bake it into the plan right at the beginning, rather than having to come back and trying to paint over it, which can be very messy. The other obstacle, or the other risk or issue, major issue I see, is that there's been a bit of some excellent research actually that was done in conjunction with, I think it was the University of New England and the Financial Planning Association some years ago. And what they discovered was the biggest obstacle to successful succession planning was the lack of a retirement plan for the first generation. Because you can sit down around the kitchen table and talk about this as long as you want. You can have the most perfect plan, but if there's no way to fund mum and dad to move off that farm or to move into a different phase of their life, it's not going anywhere.
100%, Susan, 100%.
It's not going anywhere.
And I've seen the biggest obstacles, is it?
It is the biggest obstacle, single biggest obstacle. And I've seen some dreadful situations where that hasn't been thought through, and all these promises were made, all these expectations were set up, it all looked good on paper, it all sounded great, but there was no consideration of how mum and dad were going to live. And what ended up happening was that they would sit at their kitchen table every second Thursday and wait for their daughter-in-law to bring them a cheque.
So they could survive.
So they could survive. Think about how that feels to everybody.
After all that hard work. Yeah, and that's right. Everybody's affected by that, not just them.
Exactly. It's awful, you know.
No, I'd just like to support Susan on that point, because it's important to say 80% of the clients that I see, I will be doing absolutely nothing for them first when we're talking about the long-term succession, except sending them to a financial planner to actually get an assessment of what the retirement costs will be for what parents want to do in retirement. So it's just so important.
And look, even things like budgeting. So I spoke to a lovely couple in their 60s who were out far western New South Wales. They were second generation and they were looking to pass on to third generation. And they were thinking of moving into town. And so I asked her to do a budget. And she came back with a $20,000 a year budget for electricity. And I said, you are not going to pay that in town. I can promise you that. Not unless you're growing something you shouldn't be. But you are not going. So just the budgeting aspect of this stuff needs to be worked out. So that will lead into having a firm plan. And there's lots and lots of different ways you can fund retirement. There's loads of different ways. But that is the number one issue. Without that planning, those obstacles that come up will be, I mean, some of the things that I see which are heartbreaking are people that leave these conversations. There's no specific dates in mind. So they'll have the conversation with dad and he's open to doing it at 55, and then 55 comes around, he's like, no, we'll talk about it later. And then 60 comes around, no, we'll talk about it later. And 70 and 75, and then he's 78. And eventually he sees the writing on the wall and he says, all right, let's do this. And I can tell you from a financial planner's point of view, a couple of significant birthdays have passed, which means that he can no longer get access to some of the most tax-effective structuring in our system, which is the superannuation system. And I know there's a lot of noise right now about super, but it is noise. That is all it is noise. Since I've been doing this for close to 35 years now, there's been something like 5,000 legislative changes to super. Most of the, I mean, I could count on one hand how many times that affects people who are really close or at retirement. Most of it's
going to be able to keep up with those changes.
Well, that's why I've got a job.
Yeah, that's what you do.
But the point is, don't be scared by the noise, because it is just noise. Superannuation is the only game in town for retirees, because you can, in essence, you can have up to 3.5 million or thereabouts in super and convert that into a pension stream which pays you a superannuation income every fortnight or month or whatever. It pays it to you out of your own capital. Zero tax. Zero tax. Think about that. $3.5 million, zero tax. So it is the only game in town. It is the only thing.
Absolutely. And it's peace of mind.
Oh, absolutely. And the other thing I see, which is a big issue, is I hear this a lot. Oh, yes, but my super is my farm. My farm is my super, you know. Yeah. But again, I mean, that brings me back to key points like, you know, if that's how you're thinking about that major asset, you've got to consider things like capital gains tax issues, stamp duty concession, transfer of, you know, there's relief for transfer, intergenerational transfer. How's that going to play out when you're wanting that to rely on for your income in retirement? You know, there's, again, this is one of those significant birthday things, but, you know, when you sell a business, an active business, and, you know, there's some boxes you have to tick for the ATO, but it's not hard. You can make significant contributions even after the age that you might ordinarily be into as a capital gains tax-free contribution into super. So instead of, if you have to sell the farm or one of your businesses or one of your properties, instead of them working out what the CGT is going to be on that for the last 35 years, you can put it into your super if you meet all the conditions, capital gains tax-free, you know, so that's a pretty big deal to be able to save yourself that if you just get your ducks lined up in time. Again, it comes back to that communication piece, talking about this stuff, putting everything on the table, saying, well, if this looks like a good idea, let's take it through to the next step, and then the step after that, and then the step after that, and see what the fallout is and what we need to do to make sure that all happens over time.
Yeah. Susan, I just wanted to ask you a quick question because I've really got to get to Lloyd before we run out of time today. And but just quickly, the pros and cons of employed labour versus family labour.
Look, I think the problem with family labour is, and I do know some people who are dairy farmers who are going through this right at the moment, and there's been a son working on the place and he hasn't been paid properly. You know, they get dingo's wages and, you know, a drink of water and a look around and maybe a cottage. And that is a huge liability building up in the business, because it doesn't take very much. If that person became disgruntled or there was a breakdown in their relationship and the spouse becomes disgruntled, all of a sudden you're talking about having to be accountable for loss of wages, not paying superannuation is a big one. So that's the issue with employing family on farms. And I think where you've got how to handle that is to start with what the skill set is that you've got on farms. So do an audit of who your people are, who your family is, what their skill set is, what they can do, what they're qualified to do. Line that up against the jobs that you have and see where the gaps are. Employ for the gaps off farm, and what you get is a whole lot more than just someone to do a job. You get a different way of thinking, you get accountability, you get dragged along with a bit of momentum that might not have been there in the family. So, you know, there's a big difference between.
Yeah, if I could just, one quick point there. If you can't afford that, because a lot of family farmers will say, well, we can't afford to employ someone else, etc. You've got to document the sweat equity.
So exactly.
You've got someone in the family who's working in the business. You've got to be documenting what that is going to mean for them. So don't
look up your relevant awards. Look up your relevant awards. Find out what you should be paying them. Document that gap if it's there. Come to some agreement with legal advice on how that's going to be addressed at handover or transition or death or divorce or whatever. Yeah. So that's
Susan,
what I would say.
I'd just like to add there too. You talked about retirement being the number one issue and funding that. I think it's highly important too that the family members working in the family also have independent wealth being developed and their own financial advice. If anything goes
absolutely,
they're protected as well. So
absolutely.
just wanted to reinforce that point.
I think, thanks, Marina. And I think in my space, the most important thing is for every generation to have some off-farm wealth, because you need off-farm wealth for lots of reasons. You need it for debt mitigation, you need it for growth, you need it for diversification, and you need it for retirement planning. So it is not lost money, it is not dead money, it is not money that could have been spent on fencing or new yards. It has a specific role on the farm, and paying attention to off-farm wealth and getting some good advice around that. So there's lots of different ways to grow wealth off farm, and I've seen all the ones that don't work. Bitcoin jumps to mind immediately, but this is not the forum. But get some really, really good advice about somebody who understands that and can show you a way that they can put a portfolio together for you where your capital will be protected.
Yeah.
But off-farm wealth planning is paramount.
Yeah. Great.
Debt mitigation, diversification, retirement.
Yeah. Thanks for bringing that up, Marina. Thank you so much, Susan. I'm going to move on from all the issues that you have touched on to supply chains and further deregulation of agricultural markets, privatisation of infrastructure and services, and global concentration of farm input sectors and commodity markets. It is imperative that agribusinesses have a business continuity plan in place to limit disruption in times of crisis. As vital as business continuity plans are, they're not one size fits all, and to help understand and navigate our listeners and their importance, I just wanted to introduce now our next speaker, who you have been so patient and silent in the background there, Lloyd Russell, Director of TCB Solutions. Hello.
How are you going? And look, everyone's done a really great, I think what I want to try and do in this bit is pull that all together a little bit. And why it is so important and how to sort of pull it all together a little bit.
Yeah, great. Well, I'll just introduce you before we get to that then. Just for everyone who's listening, Lloyd is an expert in strategic and governance consulting, specialising in family business continuity planning, corporate governance and risk management for family farm enterprises. And Lloyd adopts a strategic and operational approach to business continuity across many industry sectors and has worked with Nursery and Garden Industry Queensland on recovery and business continuity plans following the Cyclone Marcia and also Cyclone Debbie events. Thanks, Lloyd, again. Well, let's talk first of all, if you could just begin by explaining to us, what is business continuity? What is a business continuity plan?
Thanks. Thanks, Elliot. It's an interesting thing because the first thing people think about is it's a risk management plan. And yes, it is. But a business continuity plan is actually an opportunity to not only look at the future, the current and the past, but start thinking about what can we leverage and what can we leave behind. I can go from an agricultural perspective. I've got a client who's sort of moving into the fourth generation now, and they've gone and invested in an area that's in protected housing cropping. But if you go back to the first generation, they were sheep farmers. They went from sheep farmers into cattle grazing. They went from cattle grazing into broadacre cropping, and they haven't lost any of that, and they've just grown their asset and gone along. So a business continuity plan is really the opportunity to sit down and have a look at what we've done as a family in business for the last 1, 2, 3, 4 generations, 5, 6, 7 generations, some of the people on the land, actually understanding a lot of the things that Marina brought up, that Kylie brought up, that Susan brought up, but have a look at the micro and the macro trends. One massive risk to some of the some of our major areas is supply chain disruption. And then the other ones, eco or animal terrorism, and things like that. And you think, well, crikey, I'm a farmer, I'm not going to be opened up to terrorism. Oh, yes, you are. It's happening already. But each of those things give you an opportunity because there's something that family business have got that no other business has, and it's a legacy that's driven by, generally speaking, a core group of values. And believe you me, they should be 3 or 4, not a list of 25 that you see in a corporate wall. Most of those are principles that are easily bought. These are hardcore values that the family are known for in business, and they will domicile differently in each generation, but they'll be underpinned by these values. The other thing, and I know Marina brought it up, Kylie brought it up very directly, and also Susan brought it up as well, more indirectly, and that was custodianship. What custodianship means is you are the owner of your balance sheet. You are the owner of your real estate and its fixed assets and all that sort of stuff. And it's probably 85% of your income. The other part that you are in a family business is you are the steward, you are the manager of that land, that asset and all that sort of stuff. Comes back to the communication piece, comes back to nearly everything that Kylie mentioned, and certainly Susan mentioned, is about what makes it fail. And I'll pick on Susan here, is a continuity plan actually allows you not only to have a retirement plan for the members transitioning out, but have an entry plan for the people coming in. And I want to go back to what Kylie said and what Marina said. That manages expectations.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It manages expectations and it manages obligation.
Yep.
And if you can manage expectations and obligations, you can make not only the business perform, you can make the individuals perforn.
And minimise the risk of dispute, Lloyd.
Yes, realise the risk of dispute, And I know Kylie and I know Marina's heard this before. I have never, ever, ever seen an angry bull jump out to a lawyer and ask him to sue the tractor.
Yeah.
But by jingoes, I've seen 2 humans, do it. And so it is about people behaviour. How the supply chains get disrupted. Generally speaking, it's about people behaviour. And it might be at the macro level and all that sort of stuff. So that's what a business continuity plan is all about. And I'll close off here with the other thing. It is absolutely useless to you if it's strategic without operational, and it's absolutely completely useless to you if it's operational without strategic. Yeah. And I think the other, Marina, Kylie and Susan have given ad nauseum amounts of examples on the longer versus the shorter term. So,
and everything we're discussing here has to be reassessed. How often? You go back to it every year and check it, because minds change, family.
Change. It's an ongoing thing,
and we say particularly at least every 5 years or earlier if circumstances change. So, and that doesn't mean spend money changing it. That just means reviewing it. At least see where you're tracking on things at least every 5 years or earlier if circumstances change.
And in your business continuity plan, that's the strategic section that you're looking at there. Your other operational side of it is before you do the budgeting process, before the financial year. So a business continuity plan is as important to the other stakeholders that everyone has mentioned here today: your accountant, your banker, your solicitor, your financial planner, your other different consultants, your agronomist, your vet, your animal husbandry, coordinator and all that sort of stuff, because it's pointless again if these people don't know where you want to head, and they then can't give you the advice that really is appropriate and that you need, and probably say some pretty harsh things, because harsh things are better said when everyone's in love than when they're getting a divorce.
Yeah, that's a very good point, Lloyd. We've just got a little bit of time. If we could just quickly touch on PPRR model. I'd just love you to just chat on that, to best practice in management disaster risk.
Yeah, it's and for those who don't understand that it's prevention, preparedness, recovery, and I forget the last one off the top of my head.
Response.
Yeah, response, and if we take those segments, is what can you do in your planning to help prevent it? Now, I'll use the work health and safety stuff. If a consultant says that they can mitigate 100% of your problems, sign them up and actually sign the next 3 generations of their family up, because they will be paying you. You will mitigate about 60, 70% of your risk, or because you don't know what's coming over the horizon. Then you actually have to action it by preparing. It's great that you've done the document, but you've got to action it. If it's not actioned, then it's a pointless thing. The next thing you do after that is, sure as night follows day, we are going to run into some sort of disaster, or some sort of disruption of some sort, whether it's a technical disruption, a human type, upset or whatever. And you can change them because you've actually done, your preparedness, and you've done your research on how do I mitigate these things, or how do you prevent them. Then you can actually start to, respond to what happens. Now, if you can see that coming over the hill at you sooner, then your response is a preemptive response than a post-trauma response. And then, of course, doesn't matter what happens. If you've had a change, you've got to recover from that change. So, that's that model. And if you think about it like that, you can systematically go through processes.
Yes.
You can systematically go through a process and say, well, have we thought about how we're going to mitigate it? If it happens, how are we going to see it? How are we going to be prepared for it? Okay, how are we going to manage it, or respond to it? And how are we going to do there? The bigger things that are going to come up, I suspect, more and more are going to be external issues as much as internal issues. But an external issue in family succession can actually be a divorce, because the other, the married partner isn't a part of the business. And I'm sure all the other speakers have seen this, is talking to people of my age bracket, my age bracket and a little bit older, go, I don't know who to hand it over to because I've only got 2 daughters. So, what do they do? Oh, one's a financier and one's an agronomist. What do you do? Oh, I'm a grain farmer. I don't know about you, but I reckon you've got two pretty good assets sitting there that you can start to have a conversation about. But then the other conversation is, if they're married or whatever, and I think it comes down to, to take your mind out of things. If you're looking at it from a succession perspective and you're looking at it from business continuity, that the older generation is actually the generation of origin rather than the generation of creation. And we've got to stop thinking of a generation, if there's grandkids, and we actually should think about a generation of origin as like a generation of origin, and say, right, I'm not just thinking of the next generation, I'm actually thinking of the generation that's still running around, with dirty noses and that sort of stuff on grandpa's knee or whatever. So, and I think
you should never, ever sit on your long-term succession planning because of fear of divorce, because I can guarantee you, if you do that, you'll create exactly what you're afraid of.
Yes.
And there are ways to plan for it and secure against it if it's a potential problem, but you should never freeze your succession out of fear of that.
Absolutely. We've got funding solutions in my space to deal with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And just quickly, I when I'm doing, an agricultural type thing, I also, but it does, it's in, manufacturing that as well, that when we're looking at business continuity, I go, listen, we all know the 4 that we focus on or don't like to focus on: divorce, death, disease, and disability. But the other one is exactly what everyone else has spoken about today, is I don't care. I don't care to talk about that yet. Right? Mm. You do care. You care so much about the business. It's paralysing you from having the conversation. And I suggest, doing a business continuity plan, because you're in a structured process to have very hard conversations, and you can start that wherever you want to start it.
All right. Well, thanks, Lloyd. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave it there for all of us. But based on our discussion today, it can definitely be surmised that the succession challenge, as well as legal, financial, and continuity planning, are the things that all farming families should be tackling, and with conversations needing to always take place to prevent any disharmony and to protect the family legacy. And with this in mind, before I let you go quickly, can I please have just a little tip from each of you? First of all, Marina Skinner, business consultant, Generational Harmony. What is your tip to everybody? Your one takeaway?
It's communication. Keep that communication happening and make sure you start that plan. Don't wait.
Okay, thank you. And Kylie Wilson, partner holding Redlick.
Know what you want for each generation. So if you're the older generation, as Susan's going to say, know what you want in retirement, because if you don't know, you can't plan for it.
Absolutely. And Susan Bryant, financial advisor, seeds of advice.
Off-farm investing. It doesn't matter when you start. It's never too late. It's never too early, but you need to start with some off-farm investing to manage your risks and give yourself options.
Diversify. And Lloyd Russell.
Look, I concur with all of those. So what I'd like to say is every family has a legacy. It's a positive anchor point to focus on. Let's focus on that and drive it forward.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Well, thank you all very, very much for joining us. And thank you to all our listeners, everyone who's tuned in or might be catching it up later on. It's great to have you on board. Our next webinar is Wednesday, the 29th of March, and it's at 4 p.m, same time. And we will look specifically at managing the risks of the first 36 hours after a natural disaster event. And joining us will be Lisa Beach, Acting Director, Natural Disaster at the Queensland Department of Agriculture and Fisheries. We've got Kerry Battersby, QFF. We're lovely to have Kerry with us as well, and Barry Naylor from Green Life Industry Australia. I'm Sally Williams. I've loved having you all on board. It's been a great discussion. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next month.